You look down at your arm and see skin that is smooth and practically bare. We appear far more hairless and vulnerable compared to our chimpanzee relatives in the natural world. But if you take a magnifying glass and press it closely against that seemingly smooth skin, an entirely different world is revealed. Hundreds, even thousands of tiny hairs are quietly rooted across your body. The truth is that humans have never lost their entire coat of hair. The density of hair follicles on your skin is actually not all that far off from a wild chimpanzee. Evolution didn't strip away our ancient coat entirely. It simply downsized most of those hairs into microscopic, ultra-thin, and nearly transparent vellus hairs. Yet the strangest and most paradoxical part lies in the areas where hair wasn't downsized. Why did our bodies decide to retain a thick mass of hair capable of growing dozens of centimeters long right on top of our heads? Why are there two strips of hair arched just above our eyes, intricate rows of eyelashes, and then suddenly, when we hit puberty, thick, dense patches of hair bursting out in highly sensitive areas like the armpits and groin? If nature wanted us to be naked-skinned primates to optimize cooling, why did it leave behind such calculated and peculiar hair-growing zones? To decode this mystery, we must first completely change how we view our subdermal architecture. Hair on the human body is not a single type of fiber scattered at random. It is the output of millions of independent microscopic factories, the hair follicles. And these factories are programmed to churn out entirely different products. Before you were born, during the fetal stage, your body was covered in a fine layer of soft hair called lanugo. But this coat usually sheds right around the time you draw your first breath. As you grow, the vast majority of your body surface becomes covered by a fiber type known as vellus hair, or pelos velos. These are extremely short, thin, lack a clear medulla, and have almost no pigment. You can barely see them unless light hits them at an angle. In stark contrast are terminal hairs, thicker, longer fibers with distinct dark pigmentation. Since childhood, terminal hairs have been stationed right on your scalp, eyebrows, and eyelashes. However, when your biological clock strikes puberty, a fresh wave of hormones begins to surge through your bloodstream. Suddenly, the follicle factories that lay dormant or only produced weak vellus hairs in the armpits and genital region undergo a dramatic shift. They expand in size, alter their growth cycles, and begin churning out thick, dense terminal hairs. Puberty doesn't sprinkle brand new hair follicles onto your body. It simply illuminates a sensitivity map that was already mapped out under your skin before you were born. This is where nature's ingenious coordination reveals itself. Using the exact same biological raw material, yet every single region of the body obeys a completely different developmental rule. Let's look back at our evolutionary journey millions of years ago, when human ancestors began leaving dense forests to step out onto the sun-drenched African savannas. For a primate that began endurance running on two legs to hunt prey under blistering heat, a thick coat of fur becomes a death sentence. It traps heat and blocks airflow from cooling the skin surface. Therefore, nature executed a grand trade-off, minimizing the hair coat while multiplying the number of eccrine sweat glands across the body by a factor of 10. We swapped thermal insulation for a skin surface capable of dissipating heat via sweat evaporation more efficiently than almost any other primate. Yet, why was the head granted an exception? When you stand upright on two legs under the African sun, the top of your head takes the direct, most brutal hit of solar radiation. A dense mass of hair on the head acts as a magnificent thermal radiation shield. It creates an insulating air cushion that stops sunlight from directly baking the scalp, helping protect the hypersensitive machine sitting right underneath it, the brain, while saving the body from having to pump out massive volumes of sweat just to cool the head. Nature stripped away the fur coat where it interfered with heat dissipation, but kept a biological safety helmet where the sun struck the hardest. Even so, If hair follicles are essentially similar factories, why can scalp hair grow indefinitely if left uncut, while the hair on your arm or your eyelashes always halts at a remarkably modest length? The answer doesn't lie in scissors, but in the individual biological clock of each follicle. Every single hair follicle cycles through a three-stage loop: anagen, growth; catagen, transition; and telogen, rest and shed. A scalp hair has its growth clock set to run continuously for years. Meanwhile, the clock for an arm hair or an eyelash is programmed to ring after just a few weeks or months. The hair on your arm doesn't have eyes to check a 5 mm length and decide to quit. Its manufacturing timeline simply finishes early, shedding the old fiber to make way for a new cycle before it ever has a chance to grow long. Moving up to the face, these tiny hairs begin telling an entirely different story that goes way beyond standard thermal physics. Look at your two eyebrows. They certainly serve a physical utility, acting as drainage ledges that divert salty sweat or rainwater around the sides, keeping your eyes dry and your vision crystal clear. But if their only job was to block water, a simple bone ridge would have sufficed. Eyebrows are retained in bold relief because they evolved into an exceptionally vital social communication tool. On a bare face, eyebrows function like high-contrast text fonts. They help people recognize you from a distance and serve as tools to instantly transmit nuanced emotions: surprise, anger, fear, or skepticism. Eyebrows may have started out as gutters protecting the eyes, but today they are an indispensable part of your facial signature. Right below them sit your eyelashes, the exquisite barricades guarding your eyes. Eyelashes are not solid, flat walls. They are brilliantly fine aerodynamic steering devices. Surveys across dozens of mammal species revealed a magical constant. Human eyelashes are almost always precisely 1/3 the width of the eye. At this golden ratio, the row of lashes alters airflow sweeping across the face, shunting blowing dust particles away from the eyes, and, most importantly, slashing the evaporation rate of the delicate tear film protecting your eyeballs. If eyelashes grew too long, they would backfire, creating turbulent air eddies that drag dust right back into your eyes. Moving deeper down the body to regions like the armpits and intimate areas, we encounter a bizarre and deeply mysterious hormonal mechanism. When you hit puberty, androgen hormones begin surging aggressively through your blood. But look at how hair follicles read and interpret this chemical letter. Androgens travel to the armpits and groin, commanding the follicles there to wake up and produce thick, dark, tightly curled fibers. They travel to a man's chin and trigger the growth of a rugged beard. Yet that exact same bloodstream carrying that exact same androgen up to the forehead and crown of genetically sensitive individuals orders the follicles there to shrink, weaken, and wither away. Hormones do not carry a universal verbal command, like grow. A hormone is merely a key. Whether that key unlocks the door of growth or self-destruction depends entirely on how each individual follicle translates that message into its own local dialect. Why on earth did nature bother keeping dense patches of hair in the armpits and groin after puberty? For the armpits, science has identified a distinct anatomical structure. It's not just haired skin, but a dense concentration of apocrine glands, sebaceous glands linked directly to hair follicles. When these glands ramp up activity after puberty, they secrete precursors rich in proteins and lipids. Fresh out of the skin, this secretion is virtually odorless. But your armpit is a warm, moist environment, a paradise for a specific microbial community. Skin bacteria feast on these secretions, metabolizing them into volatile compounds that produce individual body odor. Dense armpit hair acts like a diffusion forest, increasing surface area for secretions to cling to and helping scent molecules vaporize into the air. Though modern humans scramble to mask this scent with deodorants, deep in evolutionary history, body odor may have acted as a subtle chemical signal advertising sexual maturity and individual genetic identity. We must remain exceedingly cautious when discussing evolutionary reasons. Many online articles confidently claim that pubic or armpit hair exists strictly to block bacteria and infections. The humble scientific truth is much simpler. There is no single piece of evidence robust enough to prove one overarching function. Hair in sensitive areas likely contributes several minor tasks, reducing direct skin-to-skin friction during movement, providing a mild mechanical cushion, and acting as a visual cue of bodily maturity. Nature doesn't always need a grand survival justification to keep a trait. Sometimes, a trait sticks around simply because it's harmless, doesn't cost too much energy to maintain, and doesn't stop its carrier from having kids. And don't assume that the soft, microscopic vellus hairs scattered across your arms or back are useless leftover junk. They are quietly running a vital sensory operation. Notice what happens when a mosquito or a tiny bug lands on your arm. Before its legs even touch the skin surface, it bends a vellus hair. The base of every hair follicle is wrapped in a dense matrix of hypersensitive sensory nerve endings. The hair shaft functions as a mechanical lever. Even a micro movement of the hair outside immediately amplifies a signal down into the skin, alerting your nervous system that an organism is approaching. Furthermore, our hairy skin possesses specialized nerve fibers called C-tactile fibers. They respond most intensely to gentle, slow strokes at warm, human body temperatures, the exact type of contact associated with social care and bonding. In other words, that seemingly useless fuzz is part of a specialized tactile antenna system built to register affection, touch, and social connection, a survival necessity for human pack cohesion. Even in overlooked nooks like the nasal vestibule, stiff nasal hairs are hard at work. The brisses act as a rough filtration system right at the gateway of the airway. They disrupt incoming airflow, forcing large dust particles, pollen, and insects to crash and stick into the inner mucus lining before they can plunge deep into the delicate respiratory tract below. Of course, it's an aerodynamic trade-off. A thicker filter means higher air resistance. That's why nature places a coarse barrier at the entrance, leaving the fine-tuning filtration to the microscopic cilia deeper inside. When you piece all of this together, a magnificent portrait of the human body emerges. We never discarded our mammalian ancestors' hair system. We simply chopped up that ancient heavy fur coat into an array of hyper-specialized tools. Scalp hair became a thermal radiation shield and personal identity marker. Eyebrows became emotional billboards. Eyelashes turned into aerodynamic steering fins, protecting the eyes. Dense post-pubescent patches act as hormone and scent broadcast stations. Vellus hairs blend into the skin's supersensitive tactile network. And nasal hairs stand guard at the intake gate of our breath. Biology carefully distributed every single follicle to serve survival. But in our century, culture and society dictate the prejudices over which hairs are allowed to be seen, which are labeled weird or unsanitary, and which must be shaved off. A human razor can slice off the tips of hairs sticking out into the light, but it will never alter the miraculous factories and ancient evolutionary rules quietly operating deep beneath the skin. If you love stripping away everyday assumptions to gaze deep into the miraculous logic and evolutionary elegance hidden right inside our own bodies, keep exploring with Cave Curious. Because sometimes the things that seem like the most redundant and quirky details on your body are just ancient tools cleverly repurposed by nature. We'll see you around the campfire for our next journey into the strange, uncharted corners of the human story.